I'm Will.
And I'm Steven.
And this is the Post-Peak Chronicles. So, Steven, what's going on, man?
Man, I don't know if you guys watched last episode. We got part 2 of Justin Becker. Last time we left off, he was in quite a predicament. Let's go a little recap. What was going on, Justin?
So I just showed up to reception, noticed something was up. Come to find out, these two dudes named Doc and Flea were plotting to murder my cellie, tried to get me to do it. I refused to do it. So at this point, you know, it's the evening. I'm sitting in the cell the night before this is about to go down, and
let's do a little recap because
okay.
I don't think people understand. Like, so we went through. If you wasn't here for the last episode, you know, he has been through a lot in his childhood that led him to prison. So you was just sentenced to 12 years in prison, right? And you have to do 85% of your prison term, and you did about 2 years in the county jail. So now, once you've been sentenced to prison and you have gone to prison, it's been 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
You've been in prison for 2 weeks, and in that 2 weeks, you've been approached to murder your cellie.
Yes.
Who they have an unjust reason to murder your cellie, correct?
Correct. They don't have any paperwork that says, you know, he's a child molester or rapist. They don't have a kite from the back saying that, you know, this dude has a green light to whack him, that if he leaves the yard, we're all in trouble. But that's the story that they're portraying.
Right.
And you have no debt and no reason to have to do it either, correct?
Yeah, I have no debt. I don't owe any money. I haven't been in any trouble. I'm not a skinhead. I'm just a Peckerwood with the rest of the woods, right?
Right.
And so I'm not a frontline soldier. I don't have to do this if I don't want to, technically. But for refusing to do a mission, depending on what yard you're at and who's running it, you could still be in trouble for that, right? Because in their eyes, it shows where your loyalties are.
Right. So for people who don't understand, because we talk about this as, you know, abstract, like, oh, yeah, well, if he did do something, then it's okay to murder him. But we're speaking from prison terms. We're speaking from people who this is their life. This is all we know. So,
and the universal language in prison is violence.
So based on that, based on the understanding, if you break these certain laws, if you break these certain codes, then you are subject to murder, and we have to accept that.
Right.
With it, in this case, he didn't do any of those things, right?
No, he didn't do any of those things, and he's an old man, 57 years old.
Scoliosis.
Has a walker, and he's definitely mentally ill and has struggled with drug addiction his whole life.
No honor.
No, there's no honor or integrity in murdering somebody like that. He's basically defenseless. He's not going to be able to put up a fight.
So fast forward, you refuse to do it. They're going to do it. They say, just don't be in your cell when it happens. But if you're not in your cell, conspiracy, fourth strike, right?
Right.
And if you are involved, fourth strike. So damned if you do, damned if you don't, right?
Right. Well, this will be my fifth strike.
Fifth strike.
So I have 4 strikes, 3 for robbery and 1 for burglary. That's why they weren't able to strike me out in this case. But I did fight 39 to life for like around 1.5 years.
So now
I'm in the cell. You know, this is like right after they tell me it's like 5 o'clock. You know, they serve chow, which is dinner. And I'm sitting in there and I'm contemplating what to do, right? Like, I have 9 more years left to do it 85%. This is my 13th day in prison, actually, at this time. And I want to tell him, but I'm afraid because of his mental state that he's going to freak out. Be like, well, what's up? Come get it, homeboy, and get on the door and get us both whacked, right? The neighbors to the left of us are whites and they're porters. They come out whenever they want. The neighbors to the right of us are white and they're porters and they're involved in the hit. And the neighbors straight across from us on the bottom tier are the ones doing the hit, which is Doc and Flea. And so I don't know what to do, right? If I get help, I'm a snitch. If I don't get help, then I'm going to get wrapped up in conspiracy to commit murder. And this will be my 5th strike. They're going to wash me up. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison. So what do? You know? And so the night's going by. I'm drinking coffee. I'm staying up all night. Actually, like, write this big sign on like a 22 form, which is like a form you can use to request for, you know, envelopes to see the doctor, etc. And I put like in big bold letters, please help, Like, me and my celly's lives are in danger. Like, we need to be taken out of here now. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, when the guard walks, I'll just show this to him because I don't want to speak, right? Because there's dudes to the left and the right, and this reception is quiet. Nobody has TVs or fans yet. You could hear a pin drop at night. But in my mind, you know, I still have some loyalty to these individuals, and I also have 9 years left to do. So I'm like, well, I can't snitch. So I rip that page off, crumple it up, and flush it down the toilet. So it's like 4 a.m. I'm drinking coffee all night. I don't know what to do. So I take a Title 15, which is like a rules and regulation book, right? It's like an inch and a half thick. And I put one on the right side of me and one on the left side of my rib cage, one on each side, right? And I take a sheet, tear it, wrap it up, and tie it on because they're going to release us to yard, I want to say like at 8:30.
Real quick, those don't know, that's going to protect you when you're getting stabbed. So it can potentially save your life.
Right. So the knives that the whites use are usually like the size of an envelope. You know, it's going to go in you and come out the backside of you. That's how big they are. They're not playing. And so you're still going to get stabbed, but it'll probably make it where the knife only goes in like 2 inches. It's going to protect your vital organs if they don't hit you in the neck and face. So it's like a 50-50. But it's just some extra protection, right? Because I don't know.
50-50, no big deal.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm getting whacked for refusing this mission.
Right.
And so, you know, breakfast comes, and I'm just staring at Alan like, man, like, I feel for this dude. I want to tell this dude. And I'm not saying he was a good person or a bad person, but I think he was a person that had a lot of demons in his life. I don't think he was a bad guy, but I think he struggled with the adversity he faced growing up and just never figured out how to deal with it in a healthy way. And that's why he was back in prison for a dirk and dagger charge, doing 16 months with half, right? And I give him my breakfast tray because my stomach, it's in butterflies. Like, I can't eat, you know. Drinking coffee probably did not help this situation. I'm paranoid, right? And so they release yard. We go out to yard, and I'm walking a lap, and Doc and Flea, they're like, come on. So I start walking with them, and they're talking about what they're... Go ahead.
That's one thing we didn't talk about, right? Because you're in the cell with Alan.
Right.
What is he going through at this time? Because he's oblivious to everything that's going on, but I'm just so curious as to, is it anything, like, how is he? Like, who is Alan? What is, as far as you know, because you haven't known him that long.
And does
but
he
in
notice
those
peculiar
moments,
behavior of the porters not coming by?
does he not notice everything going on?
He is oblivious to it. So what he does all day is he writes poems, right? And it's funny. This is why I say he's a little mentally off. He'll write the same line 5 times, the same sentence, and just change the last word, and he'll call it a poem. You know what I mean? And he has a daughter and a granddaughter. So he would take these, like, children's stories, but there was nothing weird in them, right? It was literally children's stories that he would send to his daughter to give to his granddaughter. And what Alan would do is, because he didn't have money, nobody was looking out for him. So he would sell his poems on the tier for soups and coffee. And some people would actually do it. I don't know if it was out of sympathy or because they was really sending these poems home. But, you know, there's some special people in there. So they might have been buying them, right?
Right.
And so what had happened was, to come to find out later, was Doc and Flea had said, hey, you know, shoot him over here. We want to see him. And so they read his poems and his stories, and they took them and they misconstrued them and turned them into something they weren't, right? And they used it as an avenue to justify what they were getting ready to do, right? And that was what Alan did all day. Like, I remember I asked him to use a pen one time to write a letter, and he's like, oh, nah, I can't do it, bro. Like, I need these for my poems. Like, so we go to yard. You know, Alan's out there with his walker, gimping around the yard. And Doc and Flea, they're walking laps, and they call me over. And so I walk a lap with both of them. And I remember this dude named Powder, like, he bumped into Doc real hard, right? And Doc was like, no, I don't do that right now. And the reason is because he had a big knife, which they call a bone crusher in prison, up his ass, right? And so when the dude bumped into him, I'm sure it shifted. And it was big. It was like literally the length of an envelope. You know, they cut it out of a locker. Wherever they got it, I'm not exactly for sure, right? But it was no joke. It was the type of knife that will go in you. And if they put it in your chest, it's going to come out the backside. And so I remember that, you know, vividly. And so they're talking to me and they're like, we don't know what we want you to do. If we want you to go back to somebody else's cell. And they're like, you know what? Just go sit down in the day room and refuse to go back to your cell. And so by me doing that, like, that's prior knowledge of what's going on. Why am I refusing to go to my cell? Because my cellie's being murdered. I know about it. That's conspiracy, 110%. And so I tell Doc has 60 days left. This is the dude who is doing the hit. He's going home in 60 days, 2 months. He's serving a term, I think, of like 32 months with half, right? And I tell him, like, bro, like, you don't have family or kids or anybody you want to go home to? And he's like, nah, man, I don't have nothing out there. Like, this is my life. And it's like a dude that's going home in 60 days, he ain't got nothing to lose, and is willing. He's telling me he's going to go lock himself in my cell, that he knows he's going to get washed up for it, but he doesn't care because he wants to make sure this dude dies. How do you talk somebody like that out of doing that? You can't.
Mine is made up.
His mind was made up. And the sad thing is he was used by Flea. Flea utilized him as a tool to get what he wanted. He was young. He was 23. He was manipulatable. Mm. And that's exactly what happened. And there's a backstory on that. Him and Flea and Doc got into a fight in the cell, and Doc actually beat Flea up. I don't know if that's why he conspired this whole thing. Honestly, don't know. So they push off. I push off, right? I'm doing pull-ups over with the whites on the whites pull-up bar. And Flea comes over to me near the end of yard. And it's crazy because during yard, Doc is walking laps with my cellie, joking with him, laughing, smiling. And my cellie has no idea that in 20 minutes, this dude's going to be stabbing him 72 times. And so Flea comes up to me and he's like, you know what? I told Doc right now that I think going and locking himself in the cell is a bad idea, just to go hit him in the neck right now a bunch of times if he wants him to die. But he's like, Doc's scared. He doesn't want to get shot by the tower, because in prison, they have gunners that have mini 14s. And if they think that you're, possibly going to murder somebody or cause SBI or GBI, they will shoot you.
They will shoot you.
Some prisons they will, some prisons they won't. But there's a lot of those towers who are just waiting for that day. And so he's scared. He don't want to do it. So Flea tells me that when we return from yard, there's two sides to our building. We're in B2. There's A side and there's B side. I live on A side. So we line up with our own races, right? The South Siders, which are the Mexicans, they line up together. The whites line up together, and the brothers line up together, right? And so on B side and A side, right, the whites are going second. So I'm watching Doc and Flea return with my cellmate, like almost helping him with his walker back to the building. And they tell me just to return with B side and sit down at the table. And they got a shadow on me, this young dude named Timothy. And Timothy's telling me, like, he don't agree with the hit, and that all these dudes are going to get life, right? And so when we're returning, I don't know what to do. Like, I want to get help, but if I get help, I'm a snitch. I got 9 years to do, right? And so as we return from yard, I just start to walk slower and slower and slower, not to where it's obvious, though, right? And so Timothy's like 15 feet in front of me. And I honestly believe to this day he knew what I was doing, because he didn't want to be a part of this, right? And so there is a CO to the right of me as we're coming near the program office to get back to B yard. And legitimately, like, I wasn't going to get help. And I just heard like this outside indie, like this voice, which I credit to God to this day. Like, if someone was standing behind the left side of me, I could hear it just yell adamantly, like, Justin, if you don't get help now, you will spend the rest of your life in prison. Like, I could hear it clear as day. And I ignored it the first time. And I kept walking. I'm about to walk by this CO. And it yelled at me again. And it was like so loud and overpowering that it like paralyzed me to stop, literally, for like a quarter of a second, right? And so I don't want to lock it up. I don't want to go SNY. I don't know nothing about that side, other than that I've been indoctrinated to believe that everybody over there is a child molester and a rapist or a snitch. And so I try to say to the CO, like on the slide, like, hey, I'm in, B, cell 118. They're going to whack my cellie right now. Send help. and the CO won't even look at me or acknowledge what I just said. So now I have to stop and say it again. And he still won't look at me or acknowledge me. And during yard, the Southsiders, the Mexicans, had did a removal. And so they beat this dude up until the cops came and retrieved him from the yard, right? Came out, shot the block gun. So these dudes are in the cages now because there's a use of force. They're going to have to do an incident report. And so where I'm stopping at, it's like 10 feet from these dudes. So if this guy would have just been like, oh, okay, you know, when I said it on the sly, nobody would have knew the better. But now that I've repeated it twice and he's still not acknowledging me or the situation at hand, right? He doesn't understand the severity of what's about to take place. So I say it again. And now it's obvious I've stopped. And finally he looks at me and he's like, there's nothing I can do about it. And he points to my building and is like, keep walking. Mm. And so in my mind, I'm like, I don't know if these dudes see me try to get help. Like Satan's at work today. Like he's trying to make sure this goes down, right? So I keep walking and I walk like 5 or 6 more feet and I'm just about to walk by these COs and I hear that voice again. And it's like, Justin, get help. If you don't get help now, you're going to die in prison. And so there's 3 COs to the left of me and I'm like, it is what it is. Like I can't be a part of this, right? And so I step over and I'm like, look, I'm in B118. They're going to murder my cellie right now. Like you need to go now. And the 2 cops on the outside, they're like, nah, we don't want it. Like, they're joking. And the cop in the middle, good dude, takes me serious. He's like, did they have knives? And I'm like, yeah, they have knives, like bone crushers. Like, you need to go, right? And so now it's been like 4 minutes probably since I first stopped, right? And so I'm telling this dude, like, I'm starting to like panic a little, right? Because they're not taking me serious. So he cuffs me up. I'm even panicking more because now I'm like, these dudes are going to stab me. I can't even fight back, right? And so I'm telling him, and they put me in this cage. It's like the size of a phone booth. Like you could really only stand up in it, right? And I'm repeating over and over, like, what are you doing? Like, you need to respond. Like, they're going to kill this dude. And so like 10 minutes go by and I'm in this cage and he's like trying to talk to a sergeant, right? So by now it's been like legitimately 12 minutes. They pull me into a program office and this is at North Current State Prison, the Delano Reception Center on B Yard. And I'm telling them, look, they're going to whack this dude. Like they got knives. They're not playing around. Like you need to respond now. And right. These COs are in there joking about me going SNY, thinking it's funny. The cop who I originally asked for help, he's like, because they asked me, like, you going to go SNY? I'm like, nah, I'm not going SNY. And the cop's like, that's why I told you to keep walking. And I'm like, dude, you need to send help. It's been 15 minutes now since I first stopped and got help. And nobody's taking me serious. And so that sergeant finally calls over to the building and has an officer go check on the cell. Well, when the officer goes and checks on the cell, Doc's standing by the door covered in blood from head to toe, right? And what happens is the yard goes down. So I'm in the program office. I can hear the alarms go off. Everybody takes off running out, right? A lieutenant comes out of the back office and he's like, fuck, because he could hear me telling these dudes this whole time, you need to go, you need to go. And nobody took me serious. And so they're responding. They're like, look, we're going to put you back outside in that phone booth cage. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like, I'm thinking these dudes are going to come and whack me, right? I don't understand, right?
Right.
And so they drag me back outside. They put me in that phone booth cage. And I'm probably in there for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Like, when your adrenaline is rushing like that, it's kind of like time forever. Stops, right? So you don't really know what's what. As far as like me getting help though, I know it was 15 or 17 minutes because it took forever. And so I'm in this cage and I'm looking to my right and that's the pathway to the buildings, right? You could go right or left and I can hear keys jingling. And it's because COs are running, right? And there's like 8 nurses. And you could see these nurses, their faces just look petrified, right? And come to find out later, like a majority of those nurses, it was their first day working at the prison. And they're pushing a gurney. And I can't see Alan yet, but I could see red. I could see blood, right? Adamantly, I could see it vividly and clearly. But I can't see Alan's face yet.
Burned into your memory.
Right. And so, you know what is more burned into my memory than anything is those nurses' faces. Like, they were just petrified. And they got that machine hooked up to his arm, and it's not flatlined yet, but it's beep, 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 beep. It's like not sounding good.
Erratic.
Right. And so as they push him by me, like I can see his eyes poked out. There's holes in his face. The left side of his neck is like, it's just stabbed. Like it looked like he got hit like 40 times. It looks like ground beef, you know? And it's like if you dig a hole in the ground and you could see water pushing up through it. Blood wasn't squirting out of his neck, but it was flowing out of his neck like that. And I could legitimately see like the blood flowing out of his neck and pooling at the tips of his ears, like if you had your ears pierced, and it was just dripping off onto the gurney. And where the soft part of your neck is, right below your Adam's apple, you could see the handle from the knife. Doc took that knife and shoved it all the way into his neck where the handle was still sticking out, so he would suffocate to death no matter what. And you could see on the side that there was probably like 30 stab wounds on the side of his ribs. And at the time, there was so much blood that I didn't understand like the severity, right? Like I knew it was bad, but because of the blood, it kind of covered up the wounds more, you know, other than the neck looking like ground beef, right? And so they push him by, and I'm like, it's over. Like I got help. He still got stabbed. Now I'm a snitch. Everybody that's going to the hole and is going to be under investigation for this murder is including me. So I'm going to the hole with everybody who's involved for this murder, right?
And the COs look terrible too. You're making them look bad.
Making them look bad. Well, they made themselves look bad.
They made themselves look bad.
Yeah.
And it only makes them look better if something happens to you.
Yep.
Get rid of the only evidence against them.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly.
You have no friends right now.
And so I'm thinking about all of this, right? And I'm like, I almost come to accept in that moment, right, that I just signed my own death certificate. But I'm okay with it because I know at the end of the day that I did what was right. So for all the bad that I did in my life, if that's the one good thing that I could have tried to done and would have got whacked later that night, I was okay with that.
Now let's time out real quick on a different perspective. So obviously by the whites, they considered you a snitch, but I know me and Will were talking about this. Will, what he did was honorable, right? You wouldn't call that a snitch or a narc?
By the rules of prison, of course, that's what they're saying. But as a man, I talked to Steven about this. Like, as a man, you didn't do this for, oh my goodness, I'm trying to save myself in a sense. Yes, but more so because you knew it was wrong. And you couldn't sit within yourself and say, hey, look, this man is about to lose his life. I can do something to save him, and it's wrong. And that's to be respected.
You weren't trying to save yourself.
Right.
You know,
I was trying to save his life.
And I respect that. I
Appreciate
respect
that.
So now you're in the hole.
So IGI comes, they back me out of that cage, right? And at this time, I don't know if Alan is dead or alive. I don't know, right? I've been in this cage for like 2.5 hours cuffed up. And so they back me out and they strip me out, and then we take off. And once we get away from all these Southsiders that are still in the cages from doing that removal, they're like, what happened, man? And I'm like, is my cellie okay? Like, is he all right? Like, did he make it? And they just look at each other. They're like, nah, like, he's done. And that's like when it set in. I'm like, dude, I'm fucked. Like, it's done. Like, all this was for nothing. And I still have 9 years to do at 85%. And at that moment, I was like, I didn't think I was going to make it home. Right. And so, like, they take me back to their, like, interview room, right? And they're trying to interview me for, I want to say, like, 3 or 4 hours. And I'm like, look, I'm not here to snitch. Like, that's not why I got help. I got help so you would save his life. This is not my fault. You guys didn't respond, right? And, you know, I'm nervous because I don't know if this was a sanctioned hit or not at the time. I really don't know, right? And so they're like, look, dude, the dude locked himself in the cell with your cellie. Stabbed him, at the time they didn't know it was 72 times, but stabbed him 72 times, right? We found the weapon in your cellie's neck. Like, we know who did it, you know? So at that point, I'm like, well, I guess that's true, right? And I don't have no friends at this time, like you said, right? And IGI and ISU, they're like the police of the COs in prison. Like, they keep them accountable from bringing in phones, drugs, etc. Don't get me wrong, they're still dirty too, but you could trust them more than you could ever trust a regular CO. Mm-hmm. And so there was this lieutenant, his name's Joshua Farley, really good dude. And he's like, look, tell us, Justin, and we'll do what we can to protect you. And at this time, like, I'm thinking about how they protected Alan. And I'm like, yeah, like that.
Good luck with that.
That does not sound good, right? But they're talking about throwing me back on that yard if I don't tell them nothing. Straight up. They're like, we'll throw you back on that yard right now. And so what do? I get thrown back on that yard. I'm going to die for sure. First thing in the morning. First unlock, it's over. And so I'm still not saying nothing. And that's when Farley gets involved. And he's like, look, dude, he's like, if you tell me what I need to know, he's like, I will try to protect you. He said, I give you my word. And there was something about him and his demeanor where I was like, I feel like I could trust this dude, right? And so I told them about Doc and Flea. They found Doc, right? They knew Flea was Doc Selly, right? And so I talked about them, and that was all I talked about at that time. So they interviewed me for like 14 hours. They have the district attorney come down that same day, everything. And at that time, that was like the first murder that had happened at North Kern State Prison in 10 years. So it had been a long time. So it was like wasn't a big deal, but it was an issue, especially because of the way it went down, right? And so I explained to them about getting help and go through the motions, right? And so, this happened at, let's say, 9 a.m. in the morning. It is like 12 o'clock at night now. I'm exhausted. I'm eating sack lunches, peanut butter and jellies and cookies, miserable, knowing that I'm about to go to the hole where these dudes are at. I'm probably going to get killed, right? And I'm at the prison where the cops are looking so bad. They're okay with it. They're probably going to help these dudes whack me because that's how it works. It's very political, right? And so Farley's like, look, man, you told us what we needed to know about Doc and Flea. He's like, I'm going to try to get you transferred to another prison. So it's like 1 a.m. They call over to Wasco, get in touch with the warden. And like, this is very rare. Like, people don't get transferred at 2 a.m. Never have I ever heard of it.
Doesn't happen.
Or seen it, right? And so they got it approved. They load me up in like this Hannibal Lecter van with these thick windows.
Yeah.
I'm shackled up and cuffed up. And all these COs are like, oh, you did the right thing, this and that. And at the time, I feel like a traitor, dude. Straight up. But I couldn't be a part of that. Like, I'm not going to take an innocent man's life. At the end of the day, like, I committed crimes. I was a drug addict. I may have not been the best boyfriend, husband, father, brother, etc. But I'm not a murderer, right? And that's a line, like, once you cross it, it changes you as an individual. I've seen it in people. And so I'm in this van, and from Delano to Wasco, it's like 20 minutes away. And this is out in Central Valley, California. They grow oranges, apples, corn, etc. So we're driving down this road. It's a 2-lane road. It's 2 a.m. It's pitch black out, right? And we're driving for 10 minutes, and all of a sudden, the right-hand side of the road, there's a shoulder the size of a lane, and it goes from the road up to the cornfield, thousands of acres of corn, millions of dollars, right? And there is a fire on the shoulder. It's like a perfect square, like the size of a parking lot space, right? It's like 3 feet high, and nobody's around. And so when we drive by it, it's on the right side. It lights up the side of the van, like it's that bright, right? And I look into the flames, and this is 100% real. It looks like something is spelled out, like within the flames. It's crazy. And the guards are tripping. They call it in over the radio, right? And we're driving for 60 more seconds, and the left-hand side of the road on the shoulder is on fire, all the way up from where the road starts to the dirt, to the cornfield. Perfect square. I swear to God. The size of a parking lot space. 3 feet high. Nobody's around. It is pitch black out. Millions of dollars of corn on both sides of the road. And when we drive by it this time, I told the COs the first time, I said, did you see that? It looked like something was like spelled out in the flames. And they're like, nah, I didn't see it. And so when we drive by the second time, they see it. And they're like, what the heck? And they're tripping out because it's been an eerie day to an eerie night, right? And they call it in again. So I end up at Wasco, and I'm in the hole. I'm under investigation for a murder that I didn't commit, that I tried to prevent, right? And I'm thinking about that fire for all those years that I'm in prison, right? And I'm just going to cut to that real quick. And, you know, I'm reading in the Bible about the burning bush and this and that. And I just felt like it was God telling me, like, you know, you've made the right choice. You're on the right road now, but there's fire all around you. And if you step off this road, you could burn up.
That's good.
And so 3 days go by. I'm in a cell that's completely made out of cement, right? There's no desk. I can't be around metal because Alan was killed with a knife cut from a locker or a desk.
So they got you on suicide watch or in the suicide watch building?
I'm actually in D5. I'm in the hole at Wasco. And the cell is like, I guess it's like a suicide watch cell then, because there's nothing, right? The only thing that's metal in there is the stainless steel toilet. And so 3 days go by and they give me one of those wind up Sangean radios, right? And I'm winding it up. And like, it feels good to hear music. I haven't had a radio in years, right? You don't have those in our county. And so this song comes on by, I don't know what country singer it was, but he's singing about how he wishes he had 5 more minutes and time goes by and the clock just don't stop, right? And he's like, in 86, my grandpa said there was angels in the room. So the family gathered around because they knew the time was coming soon. And like, that song just made me break down and start crying. And I thought about like when I seen Alan die and him knowing that the last people he would ever see was the dude who murdered him or the nurses and COs working on him. And I'm like, it was an analogy or a metaphor for my future if I didn't change my life. How do I go from being a finance broker and sales engaged with 2 kids making 80 grand a year to being in prison under investigation for murder and I have 9 more years to do? How do you fall from that to that? And it was at that moment, like, I just surrendered my life to God and was like, if you give me a second chance, I will change my life. And I adamantly meant it with all of my heart. And so I'm under investigation for like, I want to say 2.5 or 3 months. I'm in the hole. All my property is under investigation because Alan was murdered in our cell. So I don't have no addresses. You can't make no phone calls. All my family at that time was very unstable, right? So they're constantly moving. So I can't even write anybody and tell them what's going on. Now I have to wait for mail to be redirected from Delano to Wasco. So after like 2 months, I finally get a letter and I'm able to send it out and tell my family what's going on, you know? And during this time period, the news station there released an article saying that I murdered my cellie because he was murdered in the cell. They assumed that I did it and I didn't, right? And so after like 3 months, IGI and ASU, they do their investigation. I end up getting cleared from being a participant in that murder. But because of me being a knucklehead in the county and trying to make a name for myself for this future that I thought I was going to have, I have level 4 points from day one. So now I'm a dropout, I'm a snitch, and I'm going to Calipatria State Prison, right? Which is notoriously violent. For like the first year I was there, I seen 11 life flights. Not all on our yard, but within the whole prison, because you can watch the chopper come land.
This life flight is when the chopper hits the yard and puts somebody on the helicopter and life flight them up out of there because it's that serious. So, yeah.
And so I would say that at that prison is like when my transformation started to take place. Because it was such an active prison, staff constantly responds to not only the incidents on our yard, but every other yard. You know, you were lucky if you got 8 hours a yard a week, if you got 1 or 2 showers a week. And so I just started to operate in the mentality that I'm trying to see the glass half full. Like, I'm going to control with what's in my control and let go of everything else. If there's no yard, that's okay. I'm going to work out and do burpees in the cell. I'm going to make a water bag, right? I'm going to do what I can in the cell. If there's no showers, that's cool. It's not going to mess up my program. I'm going to sit on my toilet and I'm going to bird bath, right? Mm-hmm. And so you learn how to take control of what you can and let go of the rest. And that's the difference between prison breaking a man and making a man. Mm-hmm. And it breaks a lot of men. A lot of dudes come out looking old and whooped because every day they're crying about no yard. They're crying about no TV. They're crying about how hot it is in the cell or how cold it is in the cell because it's never comfortable in that cell, especially when you're in the desert, right? And so I program there, but it's a level 4. It is so hard to get into programs, right? And I think I got a computer vocation, did that, stayed out of trouble. I got fortunate that Arthur Silcox, what's up if you see this? You know, he's a lifer. He's got 10 strikes for robbery. He was my cellie, and he was the captain's clerk at that time. And I was very fortunate that when I came up for my committee, right, my annual review, that he talked to the captain and kind of told him part of this story, right? Because the reality was it's very dangerous for me to be on a 4-yard. If these dudes really wanted to have me whacked, there's just as many gangs on the SNY side that are even almost more vicious and more violent in a way because it's less structured, right? It's kind of like this, like if my neighbor's white, or if my neighbor's Mexican and I'm white, right? And he thinks I'm being too loud, he'd come out and stab me 70 times in the morning and nobody cares.
Nobody's going to blink an eye.
Because I'm not a part of an SNY gang. And you get approached, but the thing is, why would I join something that's basically just changed my whole life? Why would I put myself in a similar situation? I was like, no, I'm going to do this on my own. So when I would go to yard, I would work out. I kept to another dude named Issues. We would have each other's backs. In the building I was in, there was 6 whites. On the yard, there was probably 30 of us out of like 700 dudes. And so when you work out and you run your own program and you're respectful and you just keep to yourself, you don't show emotion, you just be you. You know what I mean? And you hold your composure. You don't put yourself out there. You stay away from the drugs. All the drama's over drugs and money, right? If you can stay away from that, that's 70% of the drama in prison. And I did that. And dudes in there respect that because they want that, but they don't know how to get that. And so when they see it, there's dudes in there that used to be big homies or are currently big homies and are like, nah, leave them alone, you know? And I was fortunate that I was at a place that was like that. So I got my override out of there, which is very fortunate to get a level 4 override to a level 3. Requested Ironwood or Centinela, and they were both receiving, and I got shipped off to Pleasant Valley.
I went to both of those.
Yeah.
Ironwood and Centinela.
So I go off to Pleasant Valley. I land on A-Yard, and A-Yard is like a level 3 STG 180 kick-out yard, right? For SNY gang members. It is like just not the place you want to be if you're trying to program. It was worse than Calipad. It was crazy, right? And so I'm there for a couple months, and they have D-Yard, right, at Pleasant Valley. It's a programming yard. They got all the vocations, all the programs, everything. And I actually had this cool counselor, and he's like, look, they're going to do a swap. They got dudes they don't want on D-Yard because it is a programming yard, and they're not programming. So they're looking for people to go over there. They want like 10 or 15 dudes. And a lot of people don't want to go because of the mentality of that yard. You know, a lot of dudes are still stuck in the life that they wanted, but they couldn't have on the main line, right? And so I go over to D-Yard, and that is really like where my transformation started to change. I was very fortunate. I was there for probably a couple months, and there was this dude who used to cut my hair. He was leaving to another prison, and he's like, dude, you want a porter job in the program office? And I was like, nah, I don't want to work by the cops. You know what I mean? And he's like, nah, he's like, it's chill, dude. He's like, you'll come up on tobacco. You could sell it on the yard. You give you a hustle, right? Because I didn't really have nobody looking out for me my whole term. My stepdad would send me $50 when he could. But beyond that, if I wanted store, canteen, shoes, it was up to me, just like it was in high school. And I got that job, and it opened up a lot of avenues and a lot of doors. I got into self-help, AA, NA, prisoners of peace, right? And through all this time, I read every self-help book you can think of. And I just tried to educate myself and figure out my character defects and why I became the individual I did, right? I forgave everybody from my past, my mom, my dad, anybody that ever hurt me as a child, right? And with forgiving them, it was more for me than for them because it allowed me to let go and fill that void that I had been trying to fill with drugs all those years when I was out on the streets.
What would you say was the most influential self-help group that you went to?
I would say Prisoners of Peace. And the reason is because they taught you conflict resolution, which helps in prison, right? Most fights that happen that turn into something way bigger, whether it's a riot or whatever, is usually it's a misunderstanding, right? It's a simple sign of disrespect, or maybe you said something and the other individual interpreted it in the wrong way. And that class taught you the skills to be able to de-escalate conflict like that without you being a bitch, but just saying, whoa, hold up. and then, you talk it out. It's just a misunderstanding. That was one of the best self-help classes that I took while I was incarcerated.
What was one of the best books you read while you're in there?
So, I read this book called Think and Grow Rich by the
Napoleon Hill.
Yeah.
I gotta read that book.
Got to read that book.
Good book. And you know what I really loved about that book? There was a quote in there, and it talked about the adversity that we face in our life, tempering the spiritual metal of your soul. And what the biggest thing I think that everybody should get from that book is it gives you the ideology to understand that you can do anything you want in this life, right? You as individuals have the ability to take something from your mind and physically manifest it into existence within this realm that we live, right? So if I have an idea, or you guys, the post-P Chronicles, right? You take it, you write it out in a notebook, whether you die tomorrow or not, it is physically in this realm forever. Mm-hmm. The next guy can pick it up, follow the steps in the process to bring it into reality. And that's an example, right? You can do that with anything in your life. Fear is false. And once you realize that, it opens up so many doors that you never thought you could do because you don't believe it anymore. When you believe you could do something and you know that's what you're destined to do, there's nothing that can get in your way to keep you from achieving that.
So let's talk next steps. You obviously got out. You got out how many months ago?
Well, so it wasn't just next steps, but we'll go into that. So I got dragged back and forth to that murder trial for 4.5 years. I'm talking about every time I got subpoenaed, I had to go back to reception for a while, right? And that's a whole nother story we'll have to get into another day. There's not enough time.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Now that we're post-P Chronicles,
so
how long ago did you get out and what's going on now?
So I got out July 1st of 2022. I'm going to say this real quick. So when I was fighting my case in the county, I prayed to God. And I was like, I could do 5 straight, God, in prison, And he told me, take that deal. And it was 12 years. And I'm like, that don't add up, And he's like, just trust me, take it, right? And so I did. And all these laws and stuff changed. When I went upstate July 6th of 2017. I paroled July 1st of 2022. Adamantly.
5 years.
So, 5 years. So when I got out, I hit the ground running. I applied for financial aid, for FAFSA. I enrolled in coastline distance learning. I went to 40 job interviews, whether it was over the phone, over Zoom, in person. Got this job at IDIQ. My 50th day out. This is one of the loyalest companies ever. They know that they don't know, but Human Resources knows my story, right? And they were going to fire me because of my record. And they said, Justin, we need something to see that you've changed. And I just put together 14 motions on my own for custody with my kids. And so I had proof of all of my rehabilitation with me that day, a stack. And I gave it to this lady named Meredith, wonderful Christian lady. And she gave it to legal, and they said, you know what? We think you've changed. We're going to keep you. And she said I was the first person out of 22 people in 2 years to ever provide her anything in black and white on how they were rehabilitated, and that just didn't ghost her. And so that's 50 days out, right? But prior to this, after 3 weeks of being out, I reach out to, there's this thing called the Reintegration Academy. Dr. Reniford Reese runs it, right? And I send his assistant my story, just I type up 4 paragraphs, right, in an email. And, they give you a free laptop. They hold it at Pitzer College, but because of COVID, they did it over Zoom. And he was so impressed with my story that he set up a meeting on Zoom, met with him. Then he brought me in 3 weeks late into the Reintegration Academy, brought me on live in the Zoom. I got to tell my story, give my phone number out, give my email out. And it was so cool because people were calling me and telling me that my story inspired them and gave them hope to continue doing good and to continue trying to succeed. I'm talking about people that are in sober livings or halfway houses who are still struggling and trying to make it out of that rate of recidivism of ever going back, right? And so it was just super rewarding. I feel this is what God wants me to do with my life. Because no matter what I do or choose to do, everything ends up correlating me back to telling my story. Wow. The doors continue to open without me even trying. And it's once a calling's been placed on your life like that, you can't ignore it because everything within you is pulling you towards that. And that's exactly how I feel. So what I've really done is Dr. Reese is one of my personal mentors. I can call him, whenever I want. He mentored Rodney King for 3 years. I can now call you, Steve. I can now call
Anytime.
you, Will, right?
Anytime.
And so I try to surround myself with the most successful people that are aligned with the same ideology that I have and that want to help people and that want to make a difference in the world and in society, right? Because we need people like that. I mean, look how the world is today. And so the biggest thing is, like I was telling you earlier, well, I want to be the least successful person in my group so I could be surrounded by that many successful people.
100%.
Because when you do that, it just continues to open up doors that never would have been possible had you had not, right? And it's hard. Being a good person is hard, right? That's why so many people are bad people, because it's easy to just be a bad person. Being a good person is not always easy. Like, I don't always want to be nice to this guy who cuts me off in the store or in traffic, right? And it's been hard for me. When I got out of prison, when I was in prison, I expected everybody to let me down. And so that way, when they did, it didn't bother me. I didn't want to fight.
Surprised.
Right.
Put your guard up, right?
Right. And so when I got out, I was like, I can't operate like that. Like, I can't see the bad in everybody. Like, I have to try to see the good in everybody, or the child in everybody, right? And so the biggest thing for me is I work out every day, at least, 5 days a week. I went and helped planted a church for Tim Nisler, right?
Yep.
For Skyline out there.
Tim.
Oh, okay, you know Tim.
Oh yeah, we interviewed Tim.
Great
Yeah,
guy.
yeah, I watched it too.
Yeah.
So, but I just try to network with like-minded individuals. My biggest goal right now is to discharge parole, which I'll do at the end of June, and I know God's got my back, and it's gonna work out. Now, and I appreciate it. I just landed another opportunity to go speak. And so my biggest goal right now is to do a TED Talks eventually about not letting the circumstances you're in define who you become.
Yeah, because I just want to say again how incredible this story is and what you did, because it was so hard to do what you did. And you didn't do that on a level 1 yard, on a level 2. You did this on a 4 yard where lives were at stake, where your life was at stake. And you did something so selfless, knowing that, I'm probably going to die because of this. And this person isn't the best person, but he does not deserve what is about to happen to him. And I have to speak up. So, man.
And your actions were not the norm. And, because everyone's got to look out for themselves in prison, right?
Definitely.
That's the mentality. And then don't be a victim. And so to do that,
and don't snitch.
Don't snitch. And you put yourself in the position to risk your life for someone else. So
and it wasn't for vain. It wasn't in vain. What you did was not in vain. Yes, he lost his life, but your life was reborn.
And that voice you heard in line didn't lie to you.
No.
So I know one thing that we talked about in the office that you wanted to end this interview on. The poem.
Oh, the poem. Okay. So I wrote this poem, and actually, honestly, I just felt like God gifted it to me for this situation. So, scars created behind prison bars. Inmates sharpen locker-made knives with the intention of taking each other's lives. For what? A political cause? So wrapped up in politics that you systematically fail to see all of its flaws. Brainwashed, torn apart, made into a soldier by men with hate in their heart. Emptiness, hollow, a soul with no sight for tomorrow. Scars created behind prison bars. The sickness of your mind as it slowly rots away. The hopes and dreams you had as they slowly pass away. Just another lost fool trying to find today. Scars created behind prison bars. Angels and demons constantly surround me, but I feel like it's only the demons who found me. Anger, defeat, hate, pain, staring at these walls like I'm going insane. Memories of the past are nightmares in my sleep. I'm waking up fighting for this life I can't keep. Questioning my religion, am I living life right? Because these felonies on my jacket say my future ain't so bright. Am I a product of globalization? A world full of inequality, a system broken down by socialization? You see, I'm from a whole different denomination. A class called poverty segregation. When I was in prison, God spoke to me. He said, son, if you lay your life down, I'll set you free, because I'm tired of being a product of my environment and losing everybody close to me. So no matter who you are or what you've been through, whether you're still behind those bars or you just mentally paroled too, remember, only you can define you. It's okay to accept God and allow him to see you through, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here to explain this to you.
Amen. That's good. So
Incredible.
Justin, how can we contact you? Or how can people reach out to you?
So you can reach out to me at JJ Becker, Becker 809 at gmail.com. That's all I really have for right now. I'm going to actually extend some more social media platforms over the next month, like an Instagram, a YouTube podcast channel, and some different things like that in the works. I'm not going to lie. Kind of catching up on tech. Like, it didn't change that much over like 7.5, 8 years, but it's definitely changed.
It moves quick.
Right.
Well, like when I got out, I set up a pin for my phone, right? And it kept on locking. And I'm like, man, what the heck? And it's because it was scanning my face. They didn't have that, and at least I never had that.
Yeah. No, it's all new. Definitely was all new to me. But, man, definitely, Justin, we appreciate you coming out. We appreciate you telling your story, man. Your story is going to help so many people. And
Absolutely.
keep doing what you're doing, man. Don't stop. Don't stop, man.
Like you said, you got that calling on your heart. It's your obligation to pursue it. Does that make sense? I know Will does. I know I do. And it's, bad days aren't gonna take us off the course. So
Right.
we're here, and you got our support.
No, I appreciate it, Steve, and I appreciate it, Will. I mean, it was a blessing and a big opportunity. That's why I drove down, for almost 7 hours today from Northern California, because it was like really Satan was doing everything he could to prevent me from coming and doing this today. And I was like, I thought about it yesterday, and that's when I hit you up, and I was like, nah, I'm going to be there.
That's right, man.
Awesome.
We appreciate it, man. This is just one of a million right here, man. So I'm Will.
And I'm Steven.
And this is
the Post P
Chronicles, man.